Yo, what's up? This is your girl Dragon, and it's time for another Fortnite creative tutorial. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to build your very own dynamic last man standing system. Plus, you're going to receive a link to all the devices and the settings that I use in this tutorial. The link will be posted on the EDC and available in the descriptions below, so be sure to check it out. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Let's go! Alright, I'm going to show you guys how to build a dynamic last man standing system. This system will allow you to accomplish two objectives. Those objectives are making sure the correct team wins the round and a system that's dynamic enough to handle teams of 1v1s all the way up to 4v4s. Alright, so now that you know that, let's go ahead and jump into the playtest so I can show you what we're going to be building today. Let's do it. Alright, players spawn in on a global team and they have a certain amount of time to pick their teams. Once players pick their teams, they're going to be teleported to the game area. And there's going to be some attribute evaluators that are going to check to see how many players are in the team. And depending on how many players are in the team, it's going to enable or disable the correct amount. So you can see over here, if there's two teams in the game, it's going to enable this device to check against two teams, so 1v1. If there's three, then this one will enable, and if there's four, then this one will enable. So since there's just two of us, you can see that this one over here is blue, and it's going to be checking for a 1v1. Now, when a player eliminates another player, you can see the checks start, and Team 1 wins money. Now this continues to work no matter what team I select. So this round I'll be Team 4 and the other player will be Team 1. And you can see here I'm Team 4 and the other team is Team 1. And you can see that it still detects that there's two teams in the game. So Team 4 should win this round. Excellent. And this time I'll be Team 3. Alright, here we are, and then this time I'm gonna lose. So Team 3 should not win the round, and Team 2 wins. Alright, so that's a pretty cool system. Let me go ahead and break down the structure. Let's do it. Alright, and just so you guys know, I did a full breakdown of all the devices, the names of the devices, and the settings on the EDC. The link will be posted below, so be sure to check it out. It will definitely help you follow along better, and I hope it makes it a lot easier. Alright, the structure. When players spawn into the game, they're on a global team, and the timer begins. They have 15 seconds to select a team. When they select a team and this timer is successful, it's going to compare to target. So it's going to send an event to compare these player counters to target. And you can see each of them reflects a different amount of players. So if there's two players in the game, then this player counter will be successful and enable the attribute evaluator. You'll see here on the other side. If there's three players in the game, then this one will activate the attribute evaluator for this count, and so forth. So you can see the attribute evaluators checks if there's 2 teams in the game all the way up to 4 teams in the game. And this determines how the checks will be ran. So this only needs to be triggered once to start checks. And for 3 teams, it needs to be triggered twice to start checks. And for 4 teams, it needs to be triggered 3 times. When the timer runs out and it's done the checks and enabled the attribute evaluators, it's going to also enable the mutator zone to teleport the players to the game area on these teleporters here. Now when the players in the game, the checks will not begin until the necessary triggers events have happened. So if there's 2 players in the game, then once one of these player counters reaches the target amount of 0, it's going to trigger the attribute evaluator. Any team that's left standing with more than 0 players in the game will win the game. That player counter will send an event because it's failed to an in-game device connected to that player counter for that team to end the game and award the team that's remaining. What makes this game dynamic is that if there's 3 teams in the game, then this attribute evaluator will be enabled, and it will require it to be triggered twice to start the checks, meaning that 2 teams have to reach 0 count before it enables the timer to start the checks. If 4 people are in the game, then it needs to be triggered 3 times, meaning 3 teams need to reach a 0 count before it enables the timer up here to start the checks. What the timer does is the timer, when successful, will send an event to all of the player counters here to compare to target. And whichever target fails will send an event to the in-game device to end the game and award the team connected to that particular in-game device. And that's how you do it. Now that you know how the game works, let's go ahead and start with a rundown of all the devices, including the name of the devices. And don't forget, you can always follow along by viewing all this information on the EDC. The link will be posted below, so be sure to check it out. So let's start with the team setup. You're going to need 5 class designer devices, and these are the names. You're going to also need team settings and inventory, and this will allow the teams to be displayed on the menu. And these are the names. Next, you're going to need class selectors, and you're going to need 5 of those. And let me go ahead and show you the names. And for the pregame area, you're going to need a channel device, and this is the name. And you're also going to need 3 player counters, and these are the names. And don't forget your player spawner pads, and these are the names. Now for this tutorial I am using 4, but this map requires 16. This is if you want to have 4 players, up to 4 players per team. So you'll need 16 pads here, just to let you know. Only one pad will be set to team 1, the rest will be set to team any and class any. So be sure to drop those if you're going to be using more than 4 players on your map. Next, you're going to need a timer device, and the name for that is this. And a mutator zone. And that's the name there. Alright, so that takes care of your pregame. Let's jump into the game area. And you're going to need 4 teleporters, 1 for each team. And the names are Next, let's go ahead and drop your attribute evaluators, and you're going to need 3 of those, and these are the names. Alright, cool. Now you're going to need 4 player counters, and these are the names. And 4 in-game devices, and these are the names. Alright, it is highly recommended that you do name your devices the same as they are in the tutorial. That way it's easier for you to follow along. In addition to that, if you ever find that you're lost, be sure to check the link below to the EDC. I list all the devices, their names, as well as the settings. So let's go ahead. We're going to jump into getting into those settings right now. Let's do it. Alright, let's take a look at the island settings. This map is set to a max of 16 players with 11 teams. I have extra teams there because we only have 5 teams with 1 for global. So this will give you some room in case you need other things to do. We have team size set to dynamic and total rounds of 3. And let's see here. You want to make sure your default class is set to your global class, and for this tutorial mine is set to 11. And there's a spawn limit of 1 on this island, so as soon as they're done they're going to be switched to spectating mode. You want to make sure that last standing ends game is off, and the game win condition is most round wins. Let's start with the team setup. Starting with class designer T26 team 1. You want a class identifier of 1 and a class name of team 1. There's no functions, there's no events. For class designer T26 Team 2, it is class identifier of 2 and class name of 2. And it's quite the same there with no functions and events. I'm just going to go through this like so. Feel free to customize this whichever way you like. Moving on to class designer T26 Team 3, class identifier 3, class name of 3. And you can see I kind of left everything here on default. Again, this is all personal preference. No functions, no events. For class designer T26 Team 4, class identifier 4, class name Team 4. And again, kind of speeding through that because that's all personal preference. And then our global team, class designer T26 Global, is class identifier of 11 and a class name of Global. No functions, no events. Now let's go ahead and jump into the team settings and inventory for Team 1. The team name is Team 1. The team is 1. The class identifier is 1. And these settings are practically default. If you're doing anything special with your teams, this is where you would like to put that, either here or the class designer, or both. Just keep in mind there is a hierarchy, and if you want to know what that is, I'll post that down below. Again, there's no functions, no events. And team settings and inventory T26 Team 2 is Team 2 for the name, team of 2, and a class of 2. And I'll just go ahead and go through that. There's no functions, no events. For team settings and inventory T26 Team 3, team name is Team 3. Team is 3, and we're going to be doing a class of 3. And again, no functions, no events. For team settings and inventory T26 Team 4, it is Team 4 for the name, a team of 4, and a class of 4 as well. No functions, no events. And for team settings and inventory T26 Global, the team name is Global, the team is 11, and the class is 11, with no functions, no events. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at the player spawner pads. So, first starting with player spawner T26 Team 1, that's TM1. We're going to enable during phase always with a player team of 1 and a class of any. And we will be using this as island start. And you can turn the visible during game to off. This is just on for tutorial purposes. And there's no functions, and there's quite a few events. And that's because when the player spawner pad is marked with player team 1, the first player to spawn in the game will always spawn on this pad. Therefore, they're going to be in control of enabling very important devices that can get this game in motion. So for events, we have on player spawn, send an event to player counter T26TM2 to enable. In-game device T26TM3 to enable. Player counter T26TM4 to enable. In-game device T26TM2 to enable. Channel T26 manager to transmit. Player counter T26TM3 to enable. In-game device T26TM1 to enable. And in-game device T26TM4 to enable. For player spawner T26TM2, we're going to enable during phase always. Player team of any, class of any, island start is on. No functions, and only one event on player spawn, send an event to channel T26 manager to transmit. And that is the same for the player spawner T26TM3. You can see the settings are the same here, with the events being exactly the same. On player spawn, send an event to channel T26 manager to transmit, and so forth. Again, exactly the same. And on player spawn, send an event to channel T26 manager to transmit. Again, if you're going to have more players, let's say you have up to 16 players, with 4 players being max per team, then you want to include, you could basically copy these up to 15 spawn pads, right? That way this remains team 1 and the rest remains team any and class any. Next is the global class selector. So we got class selector T26 global. The class to switch to is 11. The team to switch to is 11. Of course, this can be anything that you assigned for your global class. For this tutorial, I'm just using 11. Just make sure your global class and team is not the same as your active teams 1 through 4. For functions, we're going to change player to team and class when receiving from channel T26 manager on receive transmit. And there's no events. For the channel device, which is channel T26 manager, there's no options here. You see all this is left to default. But for functions, we're going to transmit when receiving from the player spawner pads, and these should already be linked up if you've already placed your devices and named them. But we have it transmit when receiving from player spawner T26TM1 on player spawn, player spawner T26 team 2 on player spawn, team 3 and team 4 on player spawn. For events, when it does receive a transmit, we're going to send an event to the class selector T26 global to change player to team and class, which is this device right here. Alright, now that that's done, let's go ahead and take a look at the class selectors that would allow the players to switch their teams. So we have class selector T26 team 1. The class to switch to should be class 1. The team to switch to is 1. The activating team is 11, which is your global team. There's no functions and there's no events. Now you may wonder, why is the global team the only team to activate these devices? And that's because when players spawn in, they're going to be on the global team and class, which will allow them to select another team. Once they select another team and they're basically switched to another team and another class, they won't be able to reselect another team. So if I pick team 1 and I try to go to team 2, I won't switch to team 2. I'll always be on team 1. Now if you don't want that to happen, just go ahead and remove it. Go ahead and take off activating team and set it to team any. However, just for a more stable environment, I went ahead and I placed that there. That way players won't select multiple teams. Next is class selector T26 TM2. Class to switch to is 2. Team to switch to is 2. Activating team is 11. And no functions, no events. For class selector T26 TM3, we have class to switch to is 3. Team to switch to is 3. Activating team 11. And again, enable during phase gameplay only, no functions, no events. And class selector T26 TM4, we have class to switch to is 4, team to switch to is 4, activating team 11. So forth, no functions, no events. Again, you can double check these settings on the link below. Be sure to check it out. It's right on the EDC. Next, we have the timer. So the timer device T26 pregame. I have it set to a duration of 15 seconds and I named it select your team. It will start on game start. It will apply to everyone and it'll be true once it's successful. The completion behavior will be reset, and this is optional. I'll put it visible during game only timer. And timer running text is select your team. And if you want to, you can have it to be visible on the HUD, on the HUD. I have it set to no for tutorial purposes, since they can see the main timer here in the lobby. For functions, there's no functions because we're starting it right away. But for events, on success, we're going to send an event to the player counter T26 manager for players to compare players to target. We're going to do that for the 4-player one, as well as the 2-player one and the 3-player one. So that's player counter T26 manager 4 players, 2 players, and 3 players compare to target. We're also going to enable the mutator zone device T26 teleporters. That way it will teleport the players to the game area. Now let's check out these player counters. Alright, we have player counter T26 manager 2 players. So compare player count equal to target player count 2 players. Compare at game start, no. Compare on count change is yes. We're going to transmit on player counted or removed every time. Transmit for on compare result change, last instigator. Counted team will be any, and so forth. For functions, we're going to compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 pregame on success, and that should already be binded up. For events, on count succeeds, we're going to send an event to the attribute evaluator T26 manager 2 TMs, which means 2 teams to enable. For player counter T26 manager 3 players, we're going to compare player count equal to target player count of 3, and you can see this is quite the same from the other. For functions, compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 pregame on success. On count succeeds, send event to attribute evaluator T26 manager 3 TMs to enable. Again, that's 3 TMs, meaning 3 teams. And we got player counter T26 manager 4 players, and I'm sure you can see where this is going now. compare player count equal to 4 players, that's the target player count, and so forth. Compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 pregame on success. And events on count succeeds. And event 2, attribute evaluator T26 manager for TMS to enable. Again, that's for TMS, meaning teams, to enable. All right, quick note. Let's say you expect to have more than 4 players in the game. You can also update this setting to equal or more than 4 players. That way the count is always true. So let's say there's 10 players in the game. You want to ensure that this is successful. That way it can enable the correct attribute evaluator and assign the appropriate game win conditions. Last, we have the mutator zone, which is mutator zone device T26 teleporter. We're going to enable in phase none. And that's one of the most important settings in this case. For functions, we're going to enable when receiving from timer device T26 pregame on success. And for events, on player entering zone, we're going to send an event to teleporter T26 TM2 to teleport, and teleporter T26 TM4 to teleport, teleporter T26 TM3 to teleport, and TM1 to teleport. So it's all teleporters for each team. Alright, that covers the pregame. Let's jump into the game area. Let's start with the attribute evaluators first. So attribute evaluator T26 manager 2 TMS, or 2 teams. Activating team is any. Activating class is any. Enabled on game start is off. And what's important here is transmit every 1 time. For functions, we're going to enable when receiving from player counter T26 manager 2 players on count succeeds. Now that's the player counter that's in the pregame area. We're going to evaluate the player when receiving from player counter T26 TM1 on count succeeds. Now these are the player counters that are in the game area. Player counter T26 TM2 on count succeeds. Player counter T26 TM3 on count succeeds, and player counter T26 TM4 on count succeeds. For events, on pass, we're going to send an event to the timer device T26 checker to start, and that's it. Now for attribute evaluator T26 manager 3 TMS for 3 teams. And what's important here, you can see these settings are quite the same as the other, with the exception of transmit every 2 times. For functions, enable when receiving from player counter T26 manager 3 players on count succeeds. Now this should already be binded from your pregame area. And evaluate player when receiving from player counter T26 TM1 on count succeeds, all the way down to team 4. So that's player counter T26 team 2, team 3, and team 4 on the count succeeds. For events on pass, we're going to send an event to the timer device T26 checker to start. And then for players, attribute evaluator T26 manager for TMS, or 4 teams. We're going to be sure to, again, all the settings there is the same as the others, with the exception of transmit every 3 times. For functions, we're going to enable when receiving from player counter T26 manager 4 players on count succeeds, and evaluate player when receiving from player counter T26 TM1 on count succeeds. And you can see this is exactly the same. These are the player counters that are in the gaming area. That's for teams 1, 2, 3, and 4. For events on pass, we're going to send an event to timer device T26 checker to start. Alright, now that you have those set up, let's take a look at the teleporters. So teleporter T26 TM1, teleporter group is none, the target group is none, but the selected team is 1, with a class of any. For functions, we're going to teleport when receiving from mutator zone device T26 teleporter on player entering zone. For events on teleporter, we're going to send an event to item granter 4 to grant item. Now this is optional. I didn't add this device or call out this device during the game, but if you're going to be granting your player a weapon or anything like that, you can do it when they're teleported, or you can even opt to remove this and maybe give them more time to select a team and add like a gaming, like a weapon area here where they can select their weapons and items before the game starts. All right, let's take a look at teleporter T26 team 3, and this is selected team of 3. All the settings are practically the same with the exception that it's selected for team 3. Teleport when receiving from mutator zone device T26 teleporter on player entering zone. Again, that should already be binded since we've done that already in the pregame. And then when teleported, we're going to grant them an item so that they can fight. Teleporter T26 TM2, again teleporter group none, and so forth. A selected team of 2. And functions, teleport when receiving from mutator zone device T26 teleporter on player entering zone. And let's grant them a weapon once they're teleported. And the same for team 4, except it's going to be selected team of 4. And functions, teleport when receiving from mutator zone device T26 teleporter on player entering zone. For events on teleported, send event to item granter 4 to grant the item. Alright, player counters. Player counter T26 TM1. We're going to compare player count equal to a target player count of 0. Compare at game start, no. Compare on count change, yes. Transmit on player counted or removed every time. Transmit for on compare result change, last instigator. Counted team is 1. And counted class is any. Enabled during phase or enabled on phase always. And you want to make sure this is actually hidden during your game. I have it on because we're doing a tutorial here, but you definitely don't want players to see this in the game, so be sure to turn it off. We're going to be using a zone, so be sure to set your zone to the size of your area. And make sure it does not coincide or clash with your pre-game area. For functions, we're going to compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 checker on success. Disable when receiving from player counter T26 TM1 on count succeeds. For events on count succeeds, we're going to send an event to player counter T26 TM1 to disable. So this device will disable itself once there's 0 players on this team. In addition to that, it's going to evaluate the player from the attribute evaluator T26 manager and that's for 4 teams, 3 teams, and 2 teams. You can see that here. We're going to evaluate the player each time, and this should already be binded since we've already done the attribute evaluator. On count fails, we're going to send an event to in-game device T26 TM1 to activate. And that's this right here. So in-game device T26 TM1, we're going to end the round, and the winning team will be Team 1. The victory callout will be Team 1 wins, and the defeat callout will be Team 1 wins. That is because when the other team loses, they're going to know that Team 1 won the game. And you want to make sure it's enabled at game start, and the activating team will be 1. For functions, we're going to activate when receiving from player counter T26 TM1 on count fails, and enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Alright, now to Team 2 player counter T26 TM2 equal to 0 players, and so forth. Make sure the counted team is 2. Enabled on phase always. For functions, we're going to compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 checker on success. Enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Disable when receiving from player counter T26 TM2 on count succeeds. For events, on count succeeds, we're going to send an event to the attribute evaluators once more. That's T26 manager 4 teams, 2 teams, and 3 teams to evaluate player. Again, this should already be binded up. Player counter T26 TM2 to disable. So it's going to disable itself when there's 0 players on this team. Now if the count fails and there are players on this team, it's going to send an event to the in-game device for Team 2 to activate, which is right here. And that's in-game device T26 TM2. We're going to be ending the round. The winning team will be Team 2. The callouts will be Team 2 wins. It will be enabled at game start, and the activating team is 2. Activate when receiving from player counter T26 TM2 on count fails, and enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Alright, and player counter T26 TM3 equal to 0 players, and so forth. Counted team is 3, and I think you guys can see the pattern now. Compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 checker on success. Enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Disabled when receiving from player counter T26 TM3 on count succeeds, and so forth. For events on count succeeds, we're going to send an event to attribute evaluator T26 manager 4 teams, 3 teams, and 2 teams to evaluate player. We're going to also disable the player counter T26 TM3, which is this player counter right here. It will disable itself once it reaches 0 players on the team. Now if the count fails and there are players on the team, we're going to send an event to the in-game device T26 TM3 to activate. And that device is right here. In-game device T26 TM3. For the round, we're going to end the round. The winning team will be Team 3. The callouts will be Team 3 wins. It will be enabled at game start, and activating team is 3. For functions, we're going to activate when receiving from player counter T26 TM3 on count fails, and enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Alright, player counter T26 TM4. We're going to be equal to 0 players, and so forth. Counted team is 4. And again, if you do have any issues following along, if you need extra help, be sure to check out the link below. I listed all the devices and all the settings on the EDC, so be sure to check it out. For functions, we're going to compare players to target when receiving from timer device T26 checker on success. Enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Disable when receiving from player counter T26 TM4 on count succeeds. For events on count succeeds, we're going to send an event to the attribute evaluators for 4 teams, 3 teams, and 2 teams to evaluate players. Player counter T26 team 4, which is this player counter right here, is going to disable itself once it reaches 0 players on the team. When the count fails, we're going to send an event to in-game device T26 TM4 to activate, which is this one right here. In-game device T26 team 4. This will end the round. The winning team will be 4 and the callouts will be team 4 wins. It is enabled at game start and activating team is 4. We're going to activate when receiving from player counter T26 TM4 on count fails and enable when receiving from player spawner T26 TM1 on player spawned. Alright, let's check out the timer device T26 checker. The duration is 2 seconds. It's not going to be enabled at the start of the game. The activating team is any. It does apply to everyone. Completion behavior is reset. Visible during game, I have it set to only timer because it's a tutorial. However, for an active game, you might want to set it to hidden or hide this timer in your mechanic area so that players can't see it. Timer running text is checking, and you can set it to no because you don't want this to show on HUD, but I have it yes so that you can see it running during the tutorial. For functions, we're going to start when receiving from attribute evaluator T26 manager 2 teams on pass, 3 teams on pass, and 4 teams on pass. On success, we're going to send an event to the player counter T26 TM1 to compare players to target, and that's for all the player counters in the game area. That's player counter T26 TM2, 3, and 4 to compare players to target. Alright, that's it. If you need extra assistance, be sure to check out the link below to the EDC. You'll get all the device names and all the settings, and hopefully it'll make it easier for you to follow along. Yo, you guys, pretty heavy, huh? But I made it easier for you by including a link to all the settings and all the devices on the EDC, so be sure to check it out. And if this tutorial helped you, please drop some support my way. My creator code's right there on the screen. If you do, you are awesome. Alright, that's gonna do it for this tutorial. I'll see you guys in the next one. Okay? Bye!